People are already going, I was like, guys, there's a long way to go.
The way your track is designed, it brings, I would dare to say the word, an unnatural level of intensity in all of the best ways. It builds and builds and builds and builds.
Yeah.
There's nothing more I can do here, but just surrender to the divine, inexorable power. The track's called Ritual, your masterpiece of a track. It's one of the greatest pieces of music I've ever heard in my life.
It's becoming clearer and clearer to those that are diving in that sound is not just entertainment. Sound is one of the most important forces, and that was always known. Certainly in what I understand, I've never had an ayahuasca ceremony, but the importance of the Icaro. This is not frivolous. They're not singing for a laugh. This is not because it's a nice tune. It's something far, far, far deeper than that. I think the out through the mouth. And then you've got the bass. That's every out breath. So it's quite easy to follow. This is life. I'm not fucking around.
Yeah.
I want to make the things that I will be proud of till the day I perish. I really mean that. Whatever comes with that is welcome.
Jon Hopkins is one of the greatest musicians of our time, but to me, he's not just a musician. He's a world builder. He's a journey builder. And his new song, Ritual, which features my wife, Vailana, is one of the most profound pieces of music ever created. You can use it in a psychedelic journey. You can use it for just actually going through your own initiatic breathwork process, as we've done with Fit for Service. He dives into what he was thinking when he created it, where this is all sourced from, how he's been able to master his craft to such an extent. And it's an absolute honor to sit down with my brother, Jon Hopkins. Jon.
Aubrey.
We're here in Sedona. And one of the reasons why I invited you out, and the timing just worked out perfectly, is we were going to be using your masterpiece of a track. And this may sound like hyperbole. Okay, Aubrey's hyping something up, but I stand by that. It's one of the greatest pieces of music I've ever heard in my life. And it's not only music, it's a technology. And we'll talk about this. The track's called Ritual. It's broken up in a few pieces on Spotify, but also in the full form. In the full form. Yeah. And we were utilizing it in our breathwork facilitation. So I wanted you to see what your music looked like when applied to a ritual out here at Fit for Service.
It was very alarming. So we did the whole, there were two separate groups. And the first time I didn't know what to expect. And I've done that kind of breath work, but I've never seen it done to my music, and I've never done it to that kind of music. And I think maybe subliminally that was why I was writing this, because you create the things you want for yourself, you want to hear in the world. But in the first round, just seeing how far people were going, and they were like, it's a 41-minute piece, and we were like 4 minutes in, and there wasn't even any rhythm yet, and people were already going, I was like, guys, there's a long way to go. We haven't even seen the hill yet. And when you see the hill, it turns out it's a mountain. So my heart was pumping, and I was like, shit, I feel like, I don't know. There were some mitigating factors, like I just arrived, I hadn't settled in. It's been a mad couple of months, but, I was a bit on edge, and then I started seeing how it was unfolding, and it was becoming really natural. And then it felt like I was watching people releasing demons and pain, and I felt like I was sitting there, and they were passing through me.
All the feedback was exactly that,
So it was almost like, that energy was like passing through me, and I was feeling it. And then when I started crying, I was like, fuck, I'm sitting here, my music's being played, and I'm crying, and these people are freaking out. but I feel better than when my heart was pounding. And then after it had kind of climaxed and was drifting, I just started to feel an incredible sense of peace. So I felt, absorbing what was going on collectively. So even though I hadn't done any of the breathwork myself, I felt I had this amazing, just all day after that, I was just, and then when we did it again later, I always knew it was safe, but it was like there was nothing that could freak me out.
Right.
And he was even more extreme. But I was just like, like you noticed I was actually sort of dancing along and like
jamming.
miming with the drums and just generally, more present and less nervous.
Right.
Because it's a big thing, like I know how deep you can go with that practice, and there's this responsibility if people are surrendering to that music that you've made, it's got to be right. In the same way as for a medicine, which obviously this is also applicable to. It's like a serious, like you don't want to get it wrong.
Yeah. And
I've tried not to.
yeah. And that, I mean, it's one of the beautiful things about breathwork is it's an invitation to really amplify it. It's an all-you-can-eat buffet for the most part. Like you can really send it, especially when you have a facilitation team like we did, like 9 people who were there.
Yeah, that great.
Just got you no matter what, whether you're crawling on the ceiling upside down like full exorcist style, or whether you're just having your own quiet sobs or whatever cathartic experience you're having. But I can understand those feelings of almost trepidation because the way your track is designed, it brings I would dare to say the word an unnatural level of intensity. Like it is a monstrous level of intensity in all of the best ways that I could describe that. It builds and builds and builds and builds. And when I've been in, the medicine with it, there's a certain point where it just like I have to start breathing to hold the energy no matter what medicine I'm on. And then there's another point where you just have to surrender and either just like almost laugh, like, oh God, like there's nothing more I can do here, but just surrender to the divine inexorable power. Yeah.
I mean, and I do think there's something slightly hilarious about it as a piece because,
yes.
So to sort of cycle back to some of its origins, this was very much a team effort. So I was like putting it all together, but I had this amazing bunch of collaborators. And one of the beautiful things is that the main collaborator on it is this guy called Dan, who's like my oldest friend, literally my oldest friend in the world from age, I don't know, 11 or something. And he's credited as Seven Rays on the album. And he was a big part of Music for Psychedelic Therapy as well. So the beauty of making, your most personal or most uninhibited work with the person you grew up with, we've come and gone from each other's lives a bit, but musically we just sort of shared this mad vision for this thing, and to a lesser degree with the previous album, but this one was like we had these many conversations in the early stages when it was quite an ambient piece. The first sort of 10 to 15 minutes I sort of think of as like a red herring in a way, but a very beautiful sparkly red, but still red herring. So almost like the innocence of creation, like the simplicity of discovering things for the first time and everything seems safe. And I'd already written that section for another project called
as you're saying this, and I want you to continue on your story, but it is almost, you mentioned like a Genesis type of piece, like the simplicity of creation. There's an Edenic quality to the start. It's like the knowledge before good and evil, where everything is just chill and the intensity hasn't picked up and the differentiation hadn't been, self-actualizing in self-awareness. And then it builds into something much more complicated where you have to start using your will to deal with it.
Yes, exactly. Yeah. And this is where we get to the point of, the switch, I suppose, in my output from music as entertainment, in quotes, to music as punishment.
BDSM.
It's like full electronica BDSM. Into these machines or these tools that the last 2 albums have been. But yeah, there was this that Edenic section, I like that word, was really just so beautiful to write, and then Vailana's vocals are all over it. There's this like there's this ease to it and this simplicity, and you're like, oh, what's that thing over there? And then when you're in a kind of medicinal mood with it, that's a very pleasant experience. Yeah. And the idea with it was that, I mean, not that I was conscious of it at the time, but what I can see was happening was that that you need to feel that ultimate sense of security. It needs to be so powerful that when it starts to go wrong a bit or it starts to complexify, you're kind of taken aback and you're like, wait a minute, it's not, because it moves from moving gently through chords with many melodies sparkling around. They're all very kind of soft. Nothing's abrasive. Everything's just like, and then it sort of settles down into one note. And you're like, okay, I'll be on this note for a while. And then these slightly more mysterious elements come in. You're like, okay, that's a bit strange. I think I'm still all right. And then it's like, wait a minute.
Yeah.
And all these things start appearing. And I like to think of it as like it's a disrupting force. A disrupting force has come in to the simplicity, which could never last. And the innocence could never last.
But it can return.
It can return. That's the thing,
and that's the not to jump to the ending of the story here, but it does return in such a beautiful way. So that's where the arc, simplicity, complexity, pre-tragic, tragic, post-tragic, that classic arc of the journey. Where the second simplicity is even so much more beautiful than the first simplicity.
I just like to recognize the word pre-tragic there. I feel like my life is pre-tragic. So it was actually really funny. Like we had this kind of metaphorical narrative for the album. You can hear people walking around, moving around this space at the beginning. All this stuff is like, I would say you need a headphone listener, one of the immersive listening things that we do, to really hear this stuff. But you can hear someone lighting candles, or it could be incense, or it could be cinnamon, or whatever it is, and walking around the space. And we actually recorded all this stuff for real. So Vailana was lighting, you remember this from our sessions, like lighting stuff in the vocal booth. And I placed the sound of the striking the lighter in different parts of the stereo or the immersive field. And then me and my collaborators back in London actually recorded ourselves in silence, just sitting. And then occasionally someone would place an object somewhere, an object of importance. Someone would shuffle a bit, but we had the mics up super sensitive. So essentially trying to capture the energy of the room full of the people that made the record. Because it's barely perceptible, but it infuses it with something. So you've got the preparation for the ritual happening there in quite a literal sense.
And I think I think one of the things that differentiates your music from any other music is that it's a world. And, there's 440 layers of sounds that are stacked into this piece. And the world that's created, all of these things, you may not be able to pick them up with your conscious mind, but your subconscious mind is hearing them. And then on a high enough dose of psychedelics, you start to pick up different things. It's like, I've never listened to the same track twice.
That's amazing.
Because it's always like something else that you're subtly tuning into. And some things are always like essentially important, like Vailana's voice, which is like the divine feminine coming in and being like, I know it's intense, sweetheart, but it's going to be okay. But then other things that you're like, oh shit, like what is that? What's going on? And so many like beautiful other sounds. And I mean, it's also super special for me because not only is Vailana in there, breathing, lighting cinnamon, singing, but also my brother Mehcad is in there.
Yeah. Now that's a story. I think it's good to go into that actually. So a little bit of backstory to that. So I am not a numerologist, and I also attach nothing to it because I haven't learned anything. I'm open-minded to anything, but I'm sure lots of people listening to this can relate though. You start seeing certain numbers, and then once you recognize the pattern, it seems to increase. But I've had this to such an extreme degree, and at no point, you can Google any number you like, and it will basically say, this is a very important number.
Right.
It means, it's time to let go of things that are no longer serving you. It's time to it means your angel guides are on your side. It's like literally any number. So it doesn't, that's what I mean. Like I have no real expertise in it at all. Quite the opposite. But the number 22 and then 44 and then, 222 and 444 started appearing with such hilarious regularity. That was like I was being challenged to not read something into it. It started when I got my first, randomly got my first little tattoo, and it happened to be arranged for the 2nd of the 2nd, 2020, so 222020. But then the tattoo artist entered the room at 2:22 p.m. So I was like, that's interesting. And that was the first time I noticed it. And then over the following 3 years, to the point of making the album, it started to ramp up and up and up to the point where it wasn't just seeing it written down, it was people coming up to me and saying it. Again, it doesn't matter whether there's any magic or it doesn't. The experience is the same. I choose to read it as a fun little trail you can follow.
Sure.
And a couple of classic examples. I was in the airport in LAX, and there were these older Hispanic women who were all talking entirely in Spanish. And then one, I think they were talking about which gate to go to, because I heard the word puerta, which I believe is gate. And one of them just turned around to me and went, 22? I was like, okay. And another example, I went into the studio where we mastered the first version of the record, which has a great number of officers in, and a really friendly looking dude just happened to follow me in with a whole like a crate of water that he was pushing, like bottles of water. And he just said, do you know where room 222 is?
That's hilarious.
And, there are a great many of these. And I started writing them down. And then I stopped because it was like, this is happening all the time. I'm no clearer what it means, but it's happening literally all the time. Anyway, so the reason I mentioned this is that you did a podcast, episode number 414. I know this because the album is 4114444 minutes long. And then I later realized, your podcast with Mehcad, which was about the spiritual technologies in Egypt. I think it's a 3-hour. It's a good one. It's a long one. And it was the middle of summer, and I was like in my favorite beer place. It was just like journaling and having a nice beer in the afternoon. And you were talking about, he was talking specifically about this temple. In fact, I don't remember which one it was now, but there was one temple where he had felt,
I think the Temple of Horus.
Okay. Yeah. So he had felt called to kind of chant the word Ka, right? So do you know what that means? Why did he?
Yeah. So, there's Ra and Ka and all of the different kind of like deities that all have the ah sound, Yahweh, Hallelujah, Jah, like everything has this sound.
Okay,
so he was kind of making parallels between and saying that the primordial sound of the masculine divine is the sound.
Okay.
And also like that's how Om starts. It really should start Om. So
like
he was basically
AUM.
So you're kind of making those parallels, and the Ka body is like also like your divine fire body. So there's
amazing
different things that he was pointing to it, and I don't know exactly which one he was, but he was kind of making that general point about the primordial sound.
Okay. So my brain is wired in, and we've talked about this, wired in its particular way to always be searching for sounds, even when it's I was listening, but I was quite chill. I was just sort of, sitting there. And you guys were talking in your normal voices, and then suddenly he demonstrates how he chanted this syllable, and his voice was like, I swear, like an octave lower suddenly. Yeah. He's got an amazing voice anyway, but it was like, I'm not going to do an impression because it's going to be feeble coming from this uniform. But yeah, so he chants this syllable, and every part of my being is just like, the fuck, I have to record that immediately. Right. I have to sample that and tune it to the record and put it in. So I went home. The crucial bit of this is like, okay, where in the podcast did this happen? I need to know, so when I go home I can sample it. And it was 2 hours, 22 minutes and 22 seconds. And I'm like, okay, I'm trying to be atheist about this whole thing, or at least, agnostic, but this is just hilarious.
Yeah.
So I went home, I sampled it, I put it in. And at this point, the track, as I was saying, I was still mostly in the red herring area, or like the Edenic, the innocent era, writing it. But when I put that in, it just changed everything. It was like the fuel, or I don't know if like you're diverting the river, or I don't know what the analogy is, but it changed everything. It changed it from being a placid and meditative kind of, traveling. We had this idea it was going to be like traveling along a river, and there would never be a climax. It's funny how that turned out. But this is it just detonated something. And I was like, okay, this is no longer under my control. Clearly, the universe has stepped in and this is where we're going.
It was a lazy river that turns into class 5 rapids.
Right. There you go. Yeah. And it's sort of up to you whether you've got like a boat or not.
Yeah, totally.
But should we listen to that sound?
Yeah, absolutely.
Some context here. That's where he is in the track.
So it really sets off the whole thing. It's like that's in the beginning, it is said in the beginning there was the word, and the word obviously would be more like a sound, right? Because at the beginning there's the sound of creation, of the emanation of the light. And that sound then starts to create the complexity of the differentiation.
Yeah.
It's cool because also people probably imagine that you're just there with the synthesizer originating all of these things on a keyboard. I'm sure you do make some things on a keyboard, but so much of your music is from life.
Well, that's the thing. So I think there's two elements. There's like, the very obviously synthetic sounds, which are all analog as well. I don't use any digital synth. Not there's anything wrong with them, but there's something more real about circuitry, that there is.
You don't use any digital synth.
No, it's
so you have 440 layers of sound, and all of it is analog
synths
that you've then put into your, metastasization. Crunch machine is just Beretta or
Crunch machine is good. I like that's a Beretta term, right? So there's that element, which is, but those are musical instruments, and they're designed, and they, the Moog 1, which is the name of the synth I use most, is the Moog synth was like, I think the first commonly, or at least vaguely readily available analog synth that's been around for sort of 50, 60 years. And it's amazing. It's just a beautiful, warm instrument. So there's that side. And then there's like the life side, the external side. And I think they need each other, because otherwise, synths on their own exist within a bit of a vacuum. And even though they're analog, it's going into a digital system, it becomes ones and zeros. But when you bring in life, sounds like that, and all the drums, there's so much air and life and real world technology in there. So I always, that the way they sit together, that's what interests me in music.
And it has a profound impact. You can feel, especially when you're opened on the medicine, and breath work is a type of medicine. It's just a very powerful type of medicine. The body responds differently in that way. And I think it's similar to even listening to live music also has a different way that no matter how well you record it, like a live piano is going to sound different than a recorded piano.
It's still true.
And you do your best with the recording to capture as much live, but there's just layers of how the sound impacts the somatic body. And etheric body as well.
Yeah, and it's funny because when I'm making this stuff and building these layers, I'm never thinking about any of this stuff. I just know when it's right, and like dropping that in there was the most clear intervention almost. Or, I think we were talking about this term, I like to use the duetting with the universe is how being open to the sounds around me appearing in the music. And I think I worked with legendary producer Brian Eno when I was young over the years, and he's produced some of the greatest rock albums of all time and pop albums of all time, but also in his own right he makes experimental music. And he taught me this concept of allowing for accidents, in fact encouraging them, because he doesn't call himself a musician. He's an artist generally, but he doesn't like to think of music from the traditional musician's angle. So he will create situations where mistakes will happen or accidents. And I realized that quite often they will be much more interesting than something I would, and by I mean my mind, will think of. So, and once you embrace that, anything can happen, an example would be like, you're recording something and then a truck will be reversing outside the studio, and it will have one of those little alarms, and it will just happen to be that beep will be on the note that you didn't know you needed, you know, or even the sound of the vehicle. Sometimes, I mean, I like to walk around and just capture things and put them in, but usually it's like when you're not expecting it, when you didn't even know you were working on a track, something will appear. And that was clearly what happened here. But there was also a great liberation. It's like once you put in this like very deep masculine echoey chant, and also you can hear there I've done a lot of processing on his voice, but you know, I invite listeners of this to skip to 2 hours 22 minutes 22 seconds into that podcast and listen to how he actually does it, because it is amazing on its own. And it's like, you know, once you enter the Destructo machine over here, it's all very well, but it has to start with a sound that has an immense potency. And I've never been to Egypt. I never thought a huge amount about, that's not true. I've definitely listened to some cool stuff about the pyramids and thought it'd be great to go, but I was really deep in what you guys were talking about. And I was like, does Egypt want to enter this composition in some way? I mean, and that's what has happened. Whether, you know, however you want to read that, and that's definitely what's happened.
I've always been a collector since I was a kid. Whether it was sports cards, magic cards, comics, stamps, or coins. And as I've gotten older, I've transitioned to collecting original art. I also believe in precious metals as one of the safest and most stable stores of wealth. The impossibly cool thing about my new company, Metalmark, as part of the Aubrey Marcus Collective, is that it combines both of these things that I love. Fully assayable and recoverable fractional gold notes, paired with impossibly beautiful, cool, and collectible limited edition art. So if for some reason you don't like the art anymore, or the art loses its value, you can always just keep the gold. If any other class of art loses its value, all you are left with is paper, or in the case of NFTs, pixels. And if you are just starting in collecting gold, instead of having to drop $2,700 on a coin like this, you can get in for less than a Benjamin. I remember when we were in studio recording Vi's vocals out in Malibu, there was a word for a particular type of sound that seems to escalate eternally higher. And it's like what is that thing that goes in where it's just like, how is this going up forever? Like, this is like an optical illusion of like the staircase
sonic equivalent
that like keeps going up no matter which way you look at it.
It is. It's the MC Escher sonic staircase. And, so the tone is a Sheppard tone. And I can't remember the name of the guy, maybe Roger Sheppard. A guy, I don't know why exactly, but he invented this sonic illusion. And I'm not a scientific about sound, but essentially what it does, the sine wave is the simplest form of sound. It has no harmonics. It's literally the waveform like that. So if you get a sine wave and it ascends through to an octave is double the frequency of the original note. So what a Sheppard tone does is when it hits that second octave, it's crossfaded into the original octave underneath. So essentially, and then it happens imperceptibly. So everything can rise, but because it doesn't matter how high it rises, because the same thing has already crossfaded underneath, but in an exactly coherent sound to that, an exactly directly related sound to that. And an example of it used in popular culture is in the Batman films, in the Christopher Nolan films. Batman's bike is, apparently Nolan's really into the Sheppard tone, so his bike is no like gear change. It always just goes up and up and up. And it makes people feel quite, I mean, it can be quite anxiety inducing. And I don't think I really shied away from that risk with certain sections of this album.
Sure.
But, so I want to bring in mention one of my other collaborators. So there's an artist called, he records under the name Ishq, ISHQ, and also Elv. And I've talked to you about Elv, ELVE before. Real name, Matt Hillier. He's an amazing guy. One of my he's sort of my unintentional teacher, really. I listened to so much of his music, and in my kind of original DMT experiences, it was his music that I would say is responsible for my change of direction from making like banging techno records I could play to people into doing what I'm doing now, in conjunction with the medicine. So once I realized that the Sheppard tones were needed, I didn't know how to make them. He does. Immediately, I just got in touch with him, and he was just like, yeah, of course I can do that. So he just started generating Sheppard tones in the studio with Dan, my other collaborator. And the way they described their day, their Sheppard Tone day, was just, they were all going completely insane. Could you imagine listening to only that?
Oh, goodness.
And there's some funny videos of it, which we will definitely publish, but they were just like, we have to leave. But they had to go and jump in a river because they were like, they were losing their mind.
For sure.
But the Sheppard Tone so it's in there, and I got quite bold with it in certain sections, and it's quite quiet in other sections. And, you know, we can link to a clip of it on its own. We can sort that out. But it's, what I made, so I had the Sheppard tones quite central, and then tried to apply that concept to everything else. So you can't keep adding sounds, right? So you mentioned 440 layers. There are many, you know, a lot of that time is silence. It's just that's the amount of actual tracks there were. But you can't just keep adding things. You have to take things away, but you want to take things away whilst not losing that Sheppard tone effect that's happening with everything. So we got into a situation where Dan and I were sitting there, and we were working out, okay, so we've got this 5-minute section here. It's clearly delineated in some way. What is the focus here? And the focus in that section is Mehcad's chant, and then the focus in the next session is the Sheppard tone. And then, of course, the focus becomes Vailana's voice towards the end. So when you're writing a 41-minute composition and you're telling this huge story or building this huge machine, it can, you know, I think the risk would be to let it, we wouldn't allow it to drift at any minute into pointlessness or self-indulgence. And maybe not everyone would agree with that, but that we did that to the best of our ability. So I think we've ended up with something that really is quite precise in its own way. And again, I go back to that thing at the beginning I said about the feeling of responsibility. It was very much true with the Psychedelic Therapy album, which is far more of a gentle, gossamer kind of cosmic, whole universe is fine type journey, into this, which is much more about roots in the earth, primal, massive destruction energy, rebirth energy. I feel like I've tangented wildly there, but it's all part of the story.
The one thing you're not afraid of is a little bit of gruel. And you said that on the last podcast.
Yeah, we did talk about
a little bit of gruel, like a little bit of intensity. And I think one of the things that, you know, as I've helped guide people through medicine journeys, is your first impulse when I was much younger and just kind of learning about it. And again, I don't consider myself a shaman, you know, but I consider myself a good guide. You know, I'm a good guide for people who want to go through their journeys. And you can sometimes be afraid of the gruel because you want people to just have this love and light experience and it all to be good. And so the earlier times I would be all on the light side, but as I've gotten more mature, I realized like the gruel is a part of the medicine. It's a part of every ayahuasca journey. It's a part of every real deep journey. And all of your big compositions, they have a bit of that. But it's also responsibly done in a way. And it has a story arc. So even Teos Caves, which we talked about on our last episode, like there's points of like, wow, I'm really down in, I'm deep in the cave where all my shadows are, where the light can't reach, but then you eventually emerge into the light. And this one, you go through the intensity, but it doesn't last to the point of madness. It lasts just to the point where you have to surrender. And then the gift of the release into that post-tragic second simplicity eventually happens. And when that happens, you're like, oh.
But this is it. So even if you're just looking at it as from a purely musical point of view, you can't just present beauty throughout, because beauty is meaningless without the opposite, I think. In this, you know, I think Wim Hof says there's no comfort without discomfort. You know, we could kill ourselves with comfort. It's like eating cake all day. It's like, it's fun. I actually don't think it would be that fun.
No.
Fun for the first few mouthfuls. But basically, in the end, you have to counter it. And I did this tour called Polarity, which was like, you know, in concert halls. So it went from the absolute quietest piano music and the ambient side of what I do right up to the most ferocious techno side, and then all the way back and then up again. And that is kind of in fact, contrast is necessary and it's fascinating and it makes for an interesting piece of music.
It makes for an interesting light.
It makes, right. So you don't have a film without a protagonist.
Right. Antagonist. Yeah.
Either.
Right.
So I kind of like to think of this almost closer to a film in a way, or a story.
And that image of, Christopher Nolan using the Sheppard Tone for Batman's Batmobile or his bike. Of course you want that. You want something where Batman is chasing you. And it's just going to get worse and worse the closer he gets. like it's just going to keep going. You're like, fuck, he's still chasing me. And it's getting more and more intense. And like, that's what it should feel like.
It's cool.
Batman's coming after you.
Exactly. And I love the way that sound design in films is not something people think about often unless they're in that world. But there's so many amazing tricks and illusions. And I like to approach music making in the same way. Like you are constructing something physical, and it's, I don't want to use manipulative, it's not that, but there's illusions in there that will place you right in the middle of a situation if you allow it to do so.
There's other cool elements too, like one of the things that you used a voice note from your dear sister Stefana, who's sitting here in the room right now. And you can't even really understand exactly what she's saying, and it's really kind of super tuned in, but the tone of it has this kind of sweetness. You could tell that she's just sending you something super loving.
So she does this thing usually on my birthday where she just sends the most beautiful voice note, and just very generously celebrating my existence and our friendship. And I think I remember the first time, so I've actually used her voice notes before. There's a track called Luminous Beings, which was on my Singularity album, and you can hear her actually, the happy birthday voice note is like towards the end. I always make sure you can't hear the words because like I don't want to distract, but I just want the energy of it to come across. It's almost womb-like. It's like, even though you can hear the that
makes sense.
Talking, but
that makes sense.
You don't want to know exactly what the words are or it gets in the way. But yeah, so this particular voice note she sent, I was going through a deep, difficult process and, of my own choosing, just, trying to reset a lot of things in my life. And she just sent me this really beautiful, encouraging voice note around that time. And it begins, and I think you can just about hear this, it begins with a sort of sigh and then it goes, I was just thinking about you. And that's after the cathartic explosion of the album. Like you've made it through and you're in the beautiful piano section, and just that the energy held in that note is just so moving to me. Even thinking about it now, I'm like, fuck, it's so beautiful. And I think I put it over in the left ear for some reason, but you can hear it if you you head to that section in the album, the last 10 minutes. When you make this kind of thing, everyone has different reactions, but my friend Dan, the collaborator at Seven Rays I keep mentioning, when he first heard that, he said it's like, it felt like the ancestors talking to me, or it felt like someone from a different stage in reality, just beaming in that encouraging energy. And then you've talked about your grandmother coming into ayahuasca trips and stuff. I feel like it ended up being that for some people, but for me, it's a very personal thing from a loved one that it's beautiful to encode. That love into the... And
it's also reminiscent for me of, in music for psychedelic therapy, there's some kids that are laughing.
Those are Dan's kids.
Yeah.
I love the fact that you notice that, because that's how I know someone's really, it's so funny because you release this kind of music and then the normal press review it. And they never mention any of the weird sounds because they're sort of listening semi in the background or writing notes, and it's very mind-based. But when people notice the kids in psychedelic therapy, I know they've really gone deep, and they're very joyful sounds. They're like, I think his kids were like, 7 and 10 around that time, and they're there, with such an innocence and a joy. So yeah, but that was more of an accident. Well, they're all accidents in a way, but I think he'd been hanging speakers in the trees and recording the sounds to send to me, and then the kids just happened to be like over there playing. And it sort of pierces the seriousness in a way sometimes. Sure. It's like, without removing the weight of what's happening. So yeah, that's a nice a lovely thing for me to have my friend in there as well.
Yeah. And that thing that, one lesson I've had in anything is whatever art I'm creating, whatever product I'm creating, if I don't love it, I don't think anybody's going to love it, right?
You have to love it.
You have to love it yourself and trust that your genuine love of something, and it has to come from the truest place of your love, not the love that your ego has for, showing off, but the love of like, I fucking love this. I love this product. I love this poem. I love this thing. And then generally other people will love it too because of our shared commonality.
And also because, just odds. There must be some people that share your taste, right?
Totally.
But I mean, that's how I operate. And it's, I won't pretend like my the more classic side of my ego, I enjoyed the fact that I was making commercially successful albums, and I would always tend to get like good reviews. And I was like, that's great. I'm great. And that, there was a sort of, I just discarded all of that, really. It's the risk that you take, and it's been amazing because I'm making the most genuine stuff I ever made. It won't be understood in the same way by the people who like that earlier stuff. Not to say that earlier stuff isn't, I'm happy with it, but what I'm making now I'm not saying it's good, but it doesn't pander to anything or anyone. It absolutely is pure. And there are consequences to that. You may not earn what you did, and that's fine. You have to kind of, if you're going to dive in, you've just got to take everything that comes with it. But and so certain responses originally, it's like my old ego was like, shit, that sucks. Oh, I can't believe I had bad reviews. And then you listen to it again, you're like, no, this was it. This was right. Again, I'm not saying it's good, but it is right. It is how it is supposed to be. And I couldn't have done better. I couldn't have worked harder. I couldn't have made 441 tracks.
Right. One of the things that's interesting is I would expect that you have the type of respect that you have from your peers. Like, you mention your name to any serious musician and they go, oh, like you just invoked the name of the maestro, right? And it's like, so the respect from your peers is like through the charts. Like anybody who's in any kind of genre associated, like you say, Jon Hopkins, they go, oh. It's like a hush falls over the conversation. Yeah. I would expect that, but also I'm actually very impressed at how commercially successful your music is, because it's like, I know a lot of unbelievably talented musicians, and I feel like they're just deeply underappreciated.
Yeah, I know a lot of amazing. Yeah, I share that with a lot of amazing.
And it's like, it sometimes makes me question the world. Like, what is wrong with you, world?
It's weird. Yeah.
Like, you need to be fucking bumping this. This is incredible.
Yeah.
But then with you, I'm like, oh man, world, good job. you got it right. Because you're getting tons and tons of streams and listens to your music as you deserve, and so it's cool. What do you think the reason for that is? Obviously, we know how talented you are, but people just they find you, they resonate you have like a cult following you must have, or something.
It's funny. I mean, it does go well, but I just think it's been an incredibly long career. I'm as old as fuck. I've been making music. I've been playing music since I was 3. And I've been recording electronically since I was 12, and I've been releasing albums or recording albums since I was 19. And first album came out in 2001, and it took years to get going. I would say it took, in the first 9 years. I did okay in the background as co-producers on other things, but I never had my own solo success until I was 23. But by that point, I think I'd just done so much work on the sound, and also it's a kind of a classic story. You do well with something, and then all these new pitfalls come in. So I was 33. My first hit album was, and I mean hit in a relative sense, obviously not talking charts or anything, but it came out, and suddenly I was like thrust into the touring life, and I fell, all the same pitfalls that so many musicians fall into: bad habits, too much partying, all the usual stuff, irresponsible behavior, and I was like, I just couldn't switch my system off. DJing in the middle of the night, it's not natural, it's not ideal for your body. Like, not only are you awake, but you're actually I think measurably, you have the same amount of adrenaline and cortisol as someone jumping out of a plane. This was measured. I don't know which artist it was, but someone on stage was measured as having that. And so you can always do the show and you can always feel amazing through the show, but the consequences on your body over the years are horrendous. So that was my deeper dive into the spiritual side and the spiritual practice. And transcendental meditation was the first thing that came along that actually really took me down into some sort of sane state again. And then over the years, like, it's a kind of classic, I think the phrase bait and switch comes in because I'm going to learn this because I have insomnia. And then, that sometimes gets a little better or it doesn't, but the experience of the night is better. But actually that technology is going to do a whole lot of other things for you that you had no idea it was going to do. Yeah. And then it started changing the music. And then the psychedelics came in as well, because the TM allowed me to feel safe enough to dive into DMT, which we may have talked about on the last podcast, but I don't recommend, and I do recommend.
Yeah, exactly.
We've been through all this stuff, exactly. And I'm sure you. But I felt like, I suppose it's just once you have there's many meditation practices as powerful as TM, and that's just the one that worked for me. Started to broaden my awareness to be much more able to accept the infinite, and then therefore with that comes the confidence to explore the weirder music or the music that's more in tune with who I am, and to stop. And for me, it was about my big thing that was holding me back was the desire to be cool, to look cool amongst my peers. And what I was doing before was like sneaking in moments of my true self, and then but also having like these techno beats going on, which I would make into things that I liked, but ultimately it wasn't as true to me. So this whole path led me deep down there, and now I've just gone like way over here making exactly what I want. But I think there are some people, to go back to your question, that have somehow come along and they've been up for coming along, and some don't. Some will be like, I wish you made stuff like you made 10 years ago. But then the stuff I made 10 years ago, when I made that, people said, I wish this sounded like the stuff you made 4 years before that. There's always going to be people, when you change, they're not delighted. I'm all right with all of that. But it's nice. There are still people who are like, okay, this is where it's going. I still get it. I still like it. In fact, maybe it will mean my real dream is that it kind of opens people to some of the practices that have changed my life. Breathwork being one, meditation being another. This whole world of like, how do you experience oneness and unity, and how do you translate that into music? And if people can receive that transmission, then I've done my job, and I feel happy.
It is kind of unique that you have these two genres that, and you've found ways to kind of blend them. But like, you're an absolutely unbelievable pianist, but then your biggest shows are typically like the full on rave.
Raves, yeah.
And then you have the whole ambient side of things, so the breath. But through this, I think one of the through lines has to be your dedication to the song itself. And I've heard you talk a little bit about this, but when you have something, you have a track, like, you basically just go all in, right?
Yeah.
Like there's the whole world goes away, and it's like, I'm giving my full undivided attention to this piece of music.
But I'm sure you can relate to this, right? That's not a choice. Yeah. And I've been encouraged by loved ones to actually start owning the fact that maybe you can be happy with yourself for, that level of diligence. And even though it's not a choice, you're still doing it, and there are consequences, and it's hard. But it just is. It's like, what are we doing here? We're not, this is life. I'm not fucking around.
Yeah.
I want to make the things that I will be proud of till the day I perish. I really mean that. And whatever comes with that is welcome.
Yeah, to know that you've left behind artifacts and masterpieces that'll stand the test of time.
Yeah, and I had like and this seems very melodramatic now as I'm looking back, and I'm glad it didn't happen. But when I finished music for psychedelic therapy, and bear in mind, I was, it was a weird time for everyone. It was all done in COVID years, and I was definitely not at my healthiest. But I remember thinking when I finished it and I gave it like that final deep ketamine test, I was like, I could die and this is done. I've done I'm happy to stop here because, that is exactly what I've been trying to say this whole time. And then, of course, you get over that. Yeah. And then you're like, maybe I'll do. Maybe it'd be nice to have some more fun, and then maybe make another album.
But it also sets a baseline for a certain attitude, which is the attitude of that the Lakota ancients and elders express, which is that Nake Nula Waung, today is a good day to die. Like I've done enough with my life so far, and I think for artists, it's about creating that art that you can stand and say, I've done something really good. And it's also in your life, like, have I loved? Have I laughed?
Yeah.
Have I cried? Have I lived?
Yeah.
And
I'm better at the music side than all. I mean, I've definitely lived. I've definitely laughed. I've definitely loved. But my personal life is much more chaotic than my musical life. But that is the one part. I don't lack confidence in that area, rightly or wrongly. I believe in this music, and as I get older, more so. And that's just. I feel very lucky to feel that way. It's great.
Yeah. What some artists, you talk to some artists and they'll say things like, it's never done. They're always tinkering and they're always slightly unhappy with the finished product because they always feel like they could do more or better. But you've managed to actually, avoid that pitfall where you actually finish a piece and you go, this piece is done.
I have a technique though, and maybe it is just the way I'm wired, and also me saying it's done may not mean, I'm not claiming that anything is, obviously I'm not saying this is perfect, but it is, they are finished. And the technique I use is really simple. I'm not actually sure if it came from anyone or I just sort of figured it out intuitively, but when finished in quotes, don't listen to it for about 2 to 3 weeks. And then when you listen to it again, listen to it with someone you trust, maybe, or on your own, but ideally with some other human consciousness in the room. And then you're write 15, 20 little points that need to be better that you could not hear 2 weeks earlier. So I then implement all of these and then maybe do a few more days detail around that. And then I don't listen to it again for another 2 weeks. And then I come in and then there might be 1 or 2 things, but it's that distance. It's a very, very simple thing. And maybe I would recommend this to maybe anyone with a creative practice. Sometimes deadlines come in, of course. So, for albums, I've never had a deadline. It's up to me. Give it to the label when it's done, and they don't start the machinery until they've got the master. But, if it's a live show or if it's a commission, of course, you have deadlines. It's different. But if you can do it, if you're working on your own time scale, that space, and I do 2 layers of that, when I hear it from start to finish and not a single point comes up, then it's finished. And that was the same with this as it has been with always. So you just have to build in an extra 2 months at the end.
Yeah.
But there's nothing worse, if this was done and released and I was but that fucking hi-hat's too loud. The sound of Violana opening her water bottle, which I've used as a drum fill, needs to be slightly lower in pitch. These are the sorts of things that but there's none of those. It's exactly how it's supposed to be.
I think another artist could also, without a deadline, all right, so that's the benefit of no deadline.
Yeah.
And then some people without a deadline, they don't finish anything. They need the deadline to finish it. And then that's also a really bad habit that we learn. And I think it's one of the things that school teaches us, actually. And if we're paying too much, if we follow that conditioning, all right, the essay's due now. I mean, for most of us, myself included, the final word to that essay was finished right fucking before I had to turn it in, right?
100%
so it's never my best work,
yeah.
But because I didn't take the time to actually write it in advance and then read it and reread it. And, I've so with my book, Own the Day, I had a deadline, pushed it as much as I could, and I'm very proud with how it turned out, but the deadline was necessary. Then now starting my own publishing company, I don't have a deadline, and it's actually it's been way more difficult because I can come up with all kinds of reasons to let's take this trip or let's do this thing. We can push it, we can push it, we can push it. But there's a devotion to the art. And then eventually finally it's I just can't bear it any longer not to finish this.
Yeah, because you become kind of weighted down by the ongoing nature of it. And it's true, there comes a point, because I'm all for the importance of breaks in the middle of the process as well, not just at the end. You have to have experiences that will then feed back into the work. It's vitally important. But yeah, there comes a point where you really just do have to get on with it. And I think with this album in particular, that's where the teamwork aspect came in, because you had to have people to bounce things off and have people sending in sounds, and that did give some structure. And in fact, it's probably why this record took something closer to 6 months, whereas my commercially bigger albums, Singularity and Immunity, were more like 2 years, where I did almost everything on my own. Immunity, I literally did everything on my own, and I don't think I've recovered from it still. But like bringing in a team,
big deal.
That's the other thing. It's changed everything, and it means that it's actually, I think one of our other conditionings as artists is to believe that it should hurt, like the whole thing should be the classic tormented artist image. And David Lynch talks about this amazingly, because he was that, and then he learned TM, and then he found that you need to understand pain and darkness, but you don't have to live it constantly in your creation process. You watch his films, they're fucked up, it's but it's also very pure, very genius level stuff. But he released all his own experience of pain and darkness through those practices. And I think even though I kind of knew that stuff intellectually, I was very much that tormented artist. I would sit in the studio and like 10 hours, 12 hours, whatever, just keep going and keep going, to the detriment of my physical and mental health. And these days I'm like, I do 4 hours a day, and I get more done in that time than I would in 10. The rest of the day is like replenishment, so exercise, good practices, whatever, nice food, or going out in the evening and having a nice meal with your friends, having some beers, whatever it is. You'll get more done, ring fencing the creative block. And then I think someone told me since then that 4 hours is roughly, it's sort of known scientifically to be about the most creative work a human can do in a day. I think I'm pretty sure that's known.
I think that's an important takeaway for people who are in the process of creating something.
But then it is also of equal importance that the rest of those hours are not spent fucking around. Like I have a lot of practices that I'd have to do to keep this all running for mind and body. And I don't always do everything, but generally there'll be at least 2 hours, 3 hours a day of where I'm doing things that will, whether it's just simple zone 2 cardio or the TM practice or breath work or sauna, whatever it is, those things will always be there. And I've started to realize that is absolutely the other half of the creative puzzle. You can't just sit there in the studio working. And those 4 hours just get more and more concentrated and more effective if you commit to all that other stuff first or afterwards, depending on your day.
Wise words. I think all of us can take that to heart. All right, if you were going to say and allow yourself to have a dream for the impact that this album will have on the world, like you've gotten to see how it works in a large breathwork container over here at Fit for Service, but what is your dream of how this is used and how it impacts the world? That's
a cool question. I think, it was so extraordinary seeing it in a ceremonial form like this. What we've been doing across the world is these listening events. So we mixed it in Dolby Atmos, which is a format that has 72 channels, and you can then translate that into certain spaces that are equipped for that.
And for those people who don't understand, we're almost always listening to stereo.
That's,
two channels. Two. So he's talking 72 channels.
Yeah. Just those 70 extra channels are really helpful. But you don't really, stereo is incredible, and you have 2 ears, right? You have 2 channels input. So headphones, when a track has been mixed or when the music's been mixed dimensionally, like I use there's an amazing software that allows you to, I think I was telling you about Altiverb in particular, which is a software that allows you to place the sounds in simulations of real spaces. So I use the reverbs from the pyramids of Giza on this album all the time. So this is still left and right, and you can listen in here, and you have a sort of infinite 360 experience on headphones. But left and right in a PA sense is not the same. And then so if you have Dolby Atmos, you can mix anything, put anything anywhere. So we've been doing these events across the world in all continents, loads of cities, and people have been coming in together and listening to this before it came out for the first time all together. And some people who are kind of on that journey will bring their yoga mat and their eye mask and they'll do breath work, or some people would literally just be there to listen to the music. But it's loud and it's intense, it's immersive. So it's not the way our kind of modern paradigm works for live performances and touring. I can't really tour anymore, but there also isn't a live version of this album. This is it. This is how it's supposed to sound, right? This and the multi-channel version. This is how it's supposed to sound. So my dream is essentially that we can expand that and have, maybe it could even live in a place for a bit, like the perfect sound for this album. But I have to say that what you had here with your man Gabriel in charge was extraordinary sound, and it was stereo, but it was duplicated, so you have multiple PAs and people are in the middle, so it really, I felt like I was right in the middle of it. So it gave me, it's sort of in the early days of this release. So I have a dream of like these outdoor listening things with the full Atmos sound in amazing places in nature, like you have here. To me, sometimes it feels like quite a nocturnal album, so I love the idea of like moonlit, sort of, but deeply like sonically perfect kind of listening rituals. But there are all these practical issues that come with that. But if it builds as an album and as a technology or as a machine like it is, then you never know. That's why I would like to.
Well, I mean, one of Vailana and my like sacred ambitions is to create a temple that people can go through these wildly transformational experiences, often, with psychedelics or without, that's going to combine the best sound, the best music, and the best sound with the best type of light. And there's all kinds of different, technologies that are coming in with lights and the way that you use lights. And so we want to blend both the architecture that, was part of the technology of the old temples with the new technology of how to use sound and light and all of these different frequencies to create like the ultimate new mystery school temple. And we're hoping, that we, build the allies together and people have enough of a shared vision. It's a group of them calling together called the Round Table that's going to help us build this temple. And so when that comes, we'll get you in there with sacred architects and all the different technicians and wizards that and try to create a temple where this will live along with some of your other transformational tracks, because they're different journeys. The ritual journey is a particular type of journey. It's almost an initiation type of journey. And the Teos Caves is another type of journey, into the darkness and out into the light. And then there's so many different journeys that you've created. And so to create like, all right, what type of journey with what type of medicine and what type of situation, but have that all be able to be unlocked.
But this is cool because there'll be new ones created.
I know.
So when you built it and everything is set up, then I would expect something to appear. I would expect a new piece to be written that's specific.
That's right.
So it's funny because we're in this era where tech is sort of becoming terrifying in all these different ways, but along with that comes so much amazing stuff. Like this album, as we've mentioned, 440 layers of audio. It's all in one project on Ableton. Like the whole thing was done, I think, with a computer, the power of which just didn't exist a few years ago, or that not affordably for me. And the way that you can make sound, you can control every single element of sound. You can be so creative with it. And the way that these formats like Atmos that we're talking about, all the speaker arrays, that's at the best it's ever been by miles. So with all the bullshit and the scary stuff comes such amazing, well, the equal opposite, I would say, is there. It's just not, way less noise is made about it, but actually through the creation of new musical instruments like Ableton itself, the program I write on, and the speaker arrays, and the fact that you can have extraordinary speakers which take up way less space and way more, you could build them into walls now in a way that you never could. These things are stepping up at the time when it's kind of important, right? I mean, and perhaps I love it because it's becoming clearer and clearer to those that are diving in that sound is not just entertainment. Sound is one of the most important forces, and that was always known, right? You know more about this than me, but like certainly in what I understand, I've never had an ayahuasca ceremony, but the importance of the Icaro, this is not frivolous. They're not singing for a laugh. This is not because it's a nice tune. it's something far, far, far deeper than that. And I think we have a sort of amazing modern version of that we can, again, making no shamanistic claims whatsoever about myself, but there is something being born here that's interesting in the technology and in the instruments that we're making.
Yeah, and the way that it pairs with certain types of medicines, like an Icaro is the perfect medicine for ayahuasca.
Yeah.
And this particularly with, ketamine or ketamine combinations is, I think, just so perfectly tuned. And where someone like, East Forest, he really dialed in like what sounds best on mushrooms, and there's, and your music for psychedelic therapy can kind of cross a lot of different lanes actually, but there's something particularly about the open expansiveness of ketamine medicine and journeys and intentional journeys with it that this pairs just so exceptionally well with.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. Because I can't remember if I shared this actually before, but, the title music for psychedelic therapy did appear to me in a ketamine test of that album. But at one point a part of me wanted to literally call it music for ketamine. But like in England, like, there's still a slight tarnishing with a slightly grotty party drug, which to me is like, that's not how I ever experienced it, but it just would have overshadowed everything. But there does seem to be it's the exact kind of length, and it guides you in a certain way through that. It provides a structure for something that can be quite formless. Yeah. This one seems to be, like I'm way more like, I don't know, with this one, because I think it could maybe be any of them.
Yeah, well, all kinds of things can emerge. I've done, journeys with me and Vailana, and we've done many journeys to this track, because obviously we've had early versions and every new version that's come out, we've had access to, and, all kinds of wild things happen. Sometimes we just listen in the full surrender, and sometimes she's, literally climbing on top of me and humping me about halfway through to move the energy tantrically through her body. And I'm like, I'm in my own space, and she's just grinding on me. And I'm like, all right, this is awesome.
Yeah.
This is great.
What a nightmare. Please stop.
Yeah. But it's just really cool to see which way this music can take.
But this is funny because I don't have any deep knowledge of Tantra at all. I haven't done any study, but for me, it definitely has this component. It has this I don't know. It's just, I never, when talking about it publicly, really, I never want to go into it really, because I don't really know what I'm talking about, but also it would, again, dominate the story a bit. If you put in your press release that this is a sex album, it's going to be it's going to be deeply embarrassing.
Music for sex and ketamine.
Yeah. But I have to, I'm not going to go into detail, but it definitely does. It is a translation of some of that kind of energy. And I think it'd be cool actually to talk about the go back to the subject of breath work, because, I didn't write it. I don't really write with a clear intention apart from to follow that thread, but it has become and you have evidence that it's like works for breath work. So I was doing one of my kind of ketamine tests to the record, which I would only do every sort of 6 weeks or something, maybe even longer between each one. But this one time, maybe 2-3 months before finishing, I got this just fully formed breathwork technique that just appeared in the middle of the ascending section, the crazy Sheppard Tone, like never-ending mountain section. And I just started breathing along with the music, but in time, and it's a 4-part breath. And so I had all these amazing recordings of Vailana singing and breathing, and so I cut the exact breathwork technique from her breathing into the record.
Cool.
And mixed it in. And it's there, like you can hear it, I think, quite clearly, but I wouldn't say it's clear enough for you to be able to discern that technique. So I can show you how this sounds. So about 24 minutes, not 22 sadly, 24 minutes into the album, you can start hearing. So I'm going to cut to where it's slightly louder. So it's a 1, 2, 3, 4 thing. So out, in, out. This is what came through, but it was through the nose. So it was like. Then I'll bring in the track so you can hear. In the out through the mouth. And then you've got the bass. That's every out breath. It's quite easy to follow. So maybe it's belly, chest, head, like Wim Hof always says.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really cool. And, you know, if you listen to Huberman talk about different types of breaths, so typically if you lengthen the time that you're exhaling versus inhaling, it's down-regulating in parasympathetic, whereas if you lengthen the time you're inhaling versus exhaling, it's sympathetic, it's activating. And so it's charging. Yeah. It's charging you with energy. And then to think like first air into your belly, second air into your chest, third bursting through the top of your head, like blasting your pineal open with your DMT. It's cool. And it's like, it's, you know, just one of the secret things encoded in this track, but I want to try it with that technique.
Well, this is the thing. I think what I like about this is that it's musical, right? It's rhythmic. So, everyone breathing at their own pace is an incredibly effective thing, and everyone doing their own thing generally, but there's a coherence. So if I like the idea of figuring out a kind of breathwork map for the record where by the time you get to this section, everyone is doing that. And you'd have to have someone on the mic sort of guiding that technique. It would be very freeform at the beginning, but gradually it would turn into this. And then obviously at the end, it would turn into super long exhales when we're like in the peaceful section. But yeah, I'm sort of, that's been in my mind for a long time, but I've never actually spoken about it till now, so it seemed like a good forum to bring that in for people. People want to try it. You can hear that in there
for sure. All of these different forms of pranayama, the different ways you breathe, have just different impacts on the body. And I think all of us would be well served learning all different types of breathwork techniques, from box breathing, which is like 4 seconds inhaling, 4 seconds holding, 4 seconds exhaling, 4 seconds holding. All of these different techniques, you just have a whole arsenal, that you have available at your disposal for different situations.
I mean, I live by this stuff. I don't know how people, I have quite a dysregulated nervous system. I'm not great at rest, and I have to do a lot to get into a restful state. So, it's our challenges that make us work at these things or guide us to research these things. But the James Nestor book is a great example of just the sheer spectrum of things you can learn and what they can do. But essentially, breath is your way to control your whole system, in a world which doesn't really support that, particularly if you're in a city. You're not surrounded by nature. Breathing easily and naturally is not encouraged. It's it feels, it's a way of reconnecting to the truth of your actual animal self, I think.
And how the animal self is connected to everything else. Breath connects us to all of life. Yeah. 100%. Jon, man, thank you for what you do in the world. Thank you for being such a good friend. You've been a part of so many different things, including the gathering of the tribe. We played that story, and you're like, I want to score that. And we're like, no shit. Okay. Fucking amazing. You know,
I was so happy. That project was, I watched it again the other day. I was like, that was amazing.
It was really good.
So thank you. You and Charles making that incredible piece of work.
Impacted a lot of people.
But I wasn't offering. I was like, I'm going, going to do this. It's not up to you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being a master of what you do. Thank you for your dedication and diligence, and for offering just these tools that can help us evolve and grow and expand and journey and play and all the things that you do, man. And thanks for being such a good friend.
Oh, thank you so much for having me. It's been an amazing week and great conversation, and proud to be a part of the whole thing. So.
Yeah, absolutely. So everybody, check out the music. Not only Ritual, but all the other music. I mean, my Spotify always shows, and this exposes how much I do journeys and how much I'm in that, is that it always exposes you as, you know, one of the top listen people, but it's actually not even a true account, because I have the raw files that you've sent me that are even like the higher quality than the stream. So if the world if Spotify actually knew how much music of yours I was listening, the whole scale would be skewed in this wildly disproportionate amount.
Well, that's frankly the nicest possible thing anyone can say, is like, I've often heard music and I've been like, oh, that's impressive. I wonder how that happened, but it's actually just listening. That's the only thing that actually counts. Do you put it on or not? That's the only thing. Yeah. And so that's so nice. I appreciate that.
Absolutely, brother. And blessings to everybody else who's been a part of it, and you know, all the people that you've included. It's really special.
Thanks, man.
Yeah.
Cool.
Thank you, everybody. We love you, and we'll see you next week. Thanks for tuning into this video. Make sure you hit subscribe. Follow me at Aubrey Marcus. Check out the Aubrey Marcus podcast, available everywhere, and leave a comment. Let me know if this video resonated or what else you would like to hear from me in the future. Thank you so much.